Hello everyone, and welcome to the Trada webinar, Keyword Match Types, Cage Match! I'm Anna Sawyer, and I'm here with Matt Hessler.
Hello.
I'm having a little bit of a scratchy voice today, so I apologize for that. Everyone, we have a lot of great information to go over, and we are going to go over it very quickly today. This is a 30-minute webinar. We're going to try and get through everything in 30 minutes, including questions. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them directly into your chat box, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. So first off, I just want to say that if you are interested in tweeting about the webinar today, please tweet out some of the things that you learn. Use the hashtag PPC Match Types, and we will give a $25 Amazon.com gift card to one of the people who uses the hashtag today. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, so if you have any sound issues or if you have to skip out, we will absolutely be sending you an email later on today with a recording of the webinar. So now it's my pleasure to properly introduce Matt Hessler, my partner in crime today. He is the Director of Account Management here at Trada. He has a ton of experience working with campaigns and advertisers of all sizes, and he knows an awful lot about keyword match types. Welcome, Matt.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered to be on today's webinar because I'm not only an expert in match types, but also wrestling.
Yeah, guys, you know, we are not only going to talk about which match types are available to you when entering keywords, but also which one we perceive as being the one match type to rule them all.
Ooh.
So wait for that. So let's just go ahead and kick it right off here. First off, let's talk a little bit about what are keyword match types. So when you are building out your AdWords campaign, keyword match types are a way to ensure that your ad shows only for specific versions of your keyword. So we'll talk just a little bit about a definition of terms here. Let me make sure that this slide advances. So a search term is a word or phrase that a user types into a search engine when they're looking for something. So this is the thing that the user, the person who's typing something into Google, actually types in. And then, you know, next up we have a keyword, which is a word or phrase that an advertiser, that's you guys, adds to your PPC campaign to try and match a search term, you know, entered by a user. So Matt, can you talk a little bit about the sort of strategy of like entering keywords and what you should choose?
So, you know, having been in search a long time, this has kind of morphed as Google's tried to, you know, figure out how to both maximize their earnings and the experience for their users. It used to be that you would want to get out there and try to come up with every permutation that would be the search terms that users looking for your product might be looking for, and that includes all those misspellings, mistypings, interesting colloquial turns of phrase, things like that. You know, if you execute a proper strategy using match types, you no longer need to come up with every single keyword. I mean, I've built out some campaigns that were, you know, 1.7 million keywords, and it's really daunting. You know, I think really savvy search marketers at this point have figured out how to trim that down using some kind of smart match type strategies.
So one thing I think is important here is that match types not only allow you to show, you know, the correct volume of keywords, but also show them to the most relevant audience.
Yeah, it's not always that you want to get in front of every single visitor. You have to think about how the language they use indicates like where they're at in terms of their buying cycle and things like that. So you want to get the most relevant people, not just always the greatest volume.
So just to be totally clear, match types are ways of entering keywords into the back end of your AdWords account to try and target different volumes and different, you know, types of relevant audiences. So let's jump right into it. First off, there are 4 keyword match types: broad match, phrase match, exact match, and then modified broad match. Modified broad match is something that is exclusive only to Google. The other 3, I believe, are available on the Search Alliance, Yahoo, Bing.
That's correct. And there's kind of a 4th floater, which is negative keywords. Some people consider that a match type, some people don't. For the purposes of this webinar, we try to think about it in terms of match types of how you would actually match up with the queries. We can answer some questions about negatives here at the end, but some people, if you're an AdWords aficionado, would say, oh, there's actually a 5th match type, and that's negative match.
The negative match, which we may touch on here if we have enough time, but you know, they work a little bit differently. So let's talk about broad match. So I like to say this is the liberal match type. So when you run a broad match keyword, you enter it without any punctuation adornments. Some of the other ones you add some punctuation to determine what kind of match type they are. And it means that an ad may be served for any version of your keyword, including extra words and synonyms. So what does that mean? We have a couple of examples here.
Wrestling examples. I love it. I wish we had
Cage
for
match.
Broad match, body slam. But in this example with wrestling shoes, what we're looking at, if that was the keyword that you had for your ad campaign, your ad might show 4 words like shoes for wrestling, used wrestling shoes, wrestling mats, kids wrestling shoes. Google does try to keep it relevant, but they're going to pair you with all types of different terms. They can use those words in whatever order they choose. And this can be a little dangerous depending on how you know your business. If you're, let's say, a high-end wrestling shoe provider, you only carry the very top brands and your focus is on selection and support and service, you might not want to show up for things like cheap wrestling shoes or discount wrestling shoes, right? So using a broad match for you might be dangerous if people are looking for items at the lowest price if that's really not your value proposition. So the good news with broad is you get a huge audience because Google can match you 11 different ways, for any 2-word query, and it's really interesting to see the types of things that result, but that audience is going to be wide and not particularly relevant.
And what do you think about kicking off your campaign with some broad match terms to sort of understand more about what converts?
So broad match is a double-edged sword in this regard. We're big students here of quality score, and broad match can give you a couple benefits and also a couple negatives. So the benefits of starting with broad match is you can start with fewer terms. You'll get paired to lots of different things. You can then look at those search queries, and that becomes an interesting way to generate more specific terms, right? You can see all the different things you were paired with. The reverse side of that is broad match terms tend to get a lower click-through rate. So because you're going to get paired with things like cheap wrestling shoes, if you're a high-end wrestling shoes provider and your ad kind of reflects that, you may actually generate a low click-through rate on that term. That can negatively affect your quality score. So you want to be smart about how you use your broad match term.
And one thing you want right off the bat when starting a campaign is a high quality score. So that's something that's definitely worth thinking about. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about phrase match. So this is sort of one step, down the ladder or up the ladder of how conservative, Google is when determining which ads to serve. So in this scenario, phrase match, and you enter these by adding quotation marks around your keyword or your keyword phrase. Your ad may appear only when a user searches on your exact keyword phrase with the words in that order, but it may include additional words.
Correct.
So first of all, I just want to clarify something here. Does this include plurals or does it not include plurals?
So Google always will accept the plural as being the same as the root term.
Even in exact match?
Correct.
Okay, good to know. All right, so phrase match. Here, again, keep in mind that it only includes the words wrestling shoes exactly, but it may include other words as well. So here we have Adidas wrestling shoes. And here again we have used wrestling shoes being included here, which can be a major issue sometimes for retailers.
Yep.
This is actually maybe a good time to mention that you could use the negative keyword used if you don't offer used wrestling shoes.
That's exactly right. So there's some ways to tighten up your phrase matching with some negatives that exclude certain terms from being paired with your designated phrase. We also find that phrase match becomes a whole lot more powerful the more keywords you have in your keyword phrase. So a one-word query done as a phrase match is almost useless because Google can pair whatever they want with it and there's no real concept of word order. 2 words gets a little more powerful. When you go to 3 words, there's a lot fewer additional words that they may add into your 3-word query. So if you're using a 3-word phrase match, you're almost getting into exact match territory in terms of how relevant the query is going to be. That's
actually an interesting point. The longer or the more long tail your keyword is, sort of the more conservative, the Google is going to be when serving your ad sort of by default.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, so that keyword that you had phrase matched was, Adidas champion wrestling shoes, something that was like the maker and the model name and the description, they're not going to pair a lot with that, right?
Yeah.
You might see a price paired with it, or a color, or maybe a cheap or discount kind of qualifier.
All right, let's move on to exact match. So if you want to enter exact match keywords, enter them in brackets. And the way this works is your ad may appear only when a user searches on your exact keyword phrase, with the words in that order, with no additional words. So this is very, very precise and will probably turn out a lower volume of clicks.
Absolutely, and just so we don't gloss over it for those who are kind of newer to search, if you look in the upper left corner of the slide where it says exact match, those are those square brackets. They're very specific. You know, you can't use the squiggly brackets, are used in different ways for Google. So square brackets basically enact the exact match type. We think exact match is a great way to go. It does require a little more work. You know, you're going to have to try, you know, a greater volume of phrases, but those phrases are going to be paired exactly. That gets you in front of the exact audience, gives you the most control of who that audience is. So, you know, we tend to like ad groups that, you know, we've got some stuff that's experimental that will start with broad and phrase, see what kind of things we get paired with. Once we know what works, we want to really take those phrases, start new ad groups, put them in as exact match types for those phrases, and bid them as aggressively as we can afford to do, because at that point we've seen that these are successful keywords and we want them to be displayed exactly like that. Now, for Google, when they're faced with serving a broad match, a phrase match, or an exact match, the party line is that they are always going to serve the query that is the most relevant. So if your exact match, if you have the exact keyword that searcher has turned in, that should be the keyword that shows up, not a broad version of that keyword.
Great. I think let's move on, because we are going to talk about another match type that we think is extremely exciting. In fact, we would even call it the one match type to rule them all.
I kind of think we're mixing metaphors. I think we should have made this the Hulk Hogan of match types to stay with our wrestling theme. But yeah, broad modified is actually a really interesting thing that Google's been doing for just about a year. It is a Google-specific match type, so if you're running campaigns on both Google and Search Alliance, you'll only see this in Google. This allows you to take a broad term and say you can serve this broad, but it always needs to be paired with this. So you would want to have these broads modified by a specific word.
For the record, I don't know anything about wrestling, but I know a lot about Lord of the Rings, so that's why that got snuck in there.
Nerd alert.
Nerd alert. So just to be clear, the way broad match works, and yes, we are using the plus sign here, is think of this like a broad match keyword. This is wrestling shoes. But any single word within the keyword phrase that you add a plus sign to, that word within the keyword phrase will be treated as an exact match. So in this scenario, your keyword is wrestling shoes. You've put the plus in front of wrestling. That word wrestling will have to be matched exactly in order for the ad to run. But shoes could be a little bit more liberal. This is treated exactly like a broad match keyword. And so it actually means that any permutation of the word shoes could show.
So let's break this down with an example. So if you had wrestling shoes as a broad match, you could, in fact, end up seeing your ad paired with the word running shoes. Because Google in a broad match just has to take one of your terms and they can pair it with something else.
Yep.
When you use the modified broad and you've modified the word wrestling, the word wrestling has to be in any of the permutations that your ad is served for. So that's why it's a little more specific. It allows you to cultivate some of those really good insights, all the advantages of broad, a wide audience. You get to learn what people are searching for, queries that are related, but it commits you to having at least your priority terms always show up in the query.
Let's talk about, just from a saving time and having control perspective, why is this so great? Can we just be more clear about why this is just so freaking great?
Well, I think it allows you to build some general ad groups, especially in the start of your campaign when you're kind of researching what works and what doesn't. but it gives you like that protective layer that says, I'm not going to get cross-served with something that's totally irrelevant for my business. Google is in the business of making money, so what they try to do is serve as many ads as they can for any relevant query. And sometimes in a regular broad match situation, you end up with a lot of mismatches, things that aren't going to be relevant to your business and that could potentially waste you money. So by using the modified broad, you're going to reduce your spend, you're going to be focused on the right audience, and you're still going to benefit from some of the learnings of broad match usage.
Yeah, so we're going to get to our questions in just a couple minutes, so everyone keep typing them in. But I can't resist addressing this one right now. Robert asks, can you put a plus in front of 2 words? Answer is absolutely.
Yep.
If you have a longer keyword phrase, you can absolutely put a plus in front of multiple words. Now, if you put a plus in front of every single word in your modified broad match phrase, it's exactly like doing an exact match phrase.
That's
so
right.
You may as well do an exact match.
People misuse this, fairly often. Like if you've used the plus sign in front of 2 words, you're basically at a phrase match. If you use the plus sign in front of 3 words, you're basically at an exact match in terms of how you're narrowing down your audience. So, you want to use it smart. Usually it's just to bring focus to 1 word of a 2 or 3 word phrase. But, there's lots of ways you can use it and get creative. One
thing I think that is really interesting about this match type, and I'll be quiet about it soon, I'm just such a fangirl, is that, it allows you to be so flexible because you can really be thoughtful about which word you apply the plus sign to.
Yeah.
I mean, it really requires, I think, a great deal of testing and, thought and expertise and all these things. So I think it's really interesting kind of educating yourself about how to use modified broad match appropriately.
Yeah, and, again, when you reference, like, the really big campaigns that have hundreds of thousands or millions of keywords, sometimes you could have cut that down by having some broad ad groups that had the right modifiers in them. Instead of having to list out every possible search permutation, now you can do a smaller number of keywords, but make sure that they're going to stay relevant with modified broad, and maybe you can cover a whole wide swath of kind of semantic language in only 5,000 keywords as opposed to 100,000.
Yes. All right, so let's go to our final thought, and then we will take just a couple moments to talk about Trada, and then we are going to get to the questions. We said we would get all this done in 30 minutes, and we are going to do that. So, each match type has a purpose. None of them really are better, even though we really love modified broad. Like a truly well-rounded paid search campaign uses all of these, and you're constantly testing all of these. Even the scary broad match can be very useful for driving a ton of volume, for getting awareness, for learning about stuff, and then even the extremely exclusive exact match can be useful for using terms that are going to convert and getting a super, super high conversion rate. So it's really worth understanding every single type of match type and using them all in your campaign.
Absolutely. A mature search campaign should have a pretty good representation of all of these match types, and they all have ways that they can help you. If you guys have specific questions on that, definitely type them into the chat box. You can go a mile deep on this with different scenarios, but we want everybody just to have a basic understanding of how the match types work, and we can provide some more detail in our best practice brief.
All right, we're going to take just a couple minutes to tell you guys about what Trada does, and then we will get to the questions. So with Trada, here's the way it works. You actually have a giant dedicated team of PPC experts working for you on your campaign, and it doesn't cost any more than if you were to do search marketing yourself. So if this sounds impossible, keep listening. Here's the way it works. We have a massive global crowd of certified paid search and Facebook advertising experts, and they do online advertising for you. They work on behalf of you. They work on your campaigns in multiples, and you manage them from a high level so you don't lose control. You see all of your data. Because multiple experts are working at the same time, collectively they have this excellent diversity of thinking. They constantly optimize. They have the time to just log in and always work on this, and they can run across multiple ad networks. We run on Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Facebook. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, please type "I'd like a demo" into the chat box, and Sarah, our awesome marketing intern, will make sure that you get connected with the right person. Finally, it's pay for performance. There actually aren't any fees. There are no startup fees. There are no management fees. It costs exactly the same as if you were to do it yourself, except that you have a massive crowd of experts working for you. So let's move on to the questions. I am just going to kick this right off here with a question from Tim, who says, what about negative keywords? And we did actually see a few questions about negative keywords. So let's just take a couple moments to talk a little bit about what negative keywords are and how they can help us.
So negative keywords, where they're a little bit different than other match types, is you can actually apply negatives at an ad group level or a campaign level. So a negative says, I never want my ad to show if the query includes this, right? And you represent that with a negative sign and then that keyword. So, and that may be on a campaign level. With our wrestling shoes example, we just say, across the board, we never want to show our ad if the query includes the word used or free or things like that. Those are great, easy negatives just to make sure you're not being shown for things. If you're an e-commerce company, you're selling products, you don't want to deal with the people that are looking for a free product or a used product because that's not really in your wheelhouse. So, you would use that as a negative. You can also apply those negatives just at an ad group level. So if you've got some sensitivity, you've got an ad group that's heavily using broad match and you're afraid to get kind of cross-served with certain brands of wrestling shoes that you don't stock. So I've got broad wrestling shoes and I sell Adidas wrestling shoes but not Nike wrestling shoes. I might want a negative Nike. You can do that at the ad group level or at the campaign level. So negatives are really interesting. They're a great way to save you some money, make sure you're addressing just the right audience, and exclude some of those queries. It's just amazing when you look at Google overall stats and just the massive amount of search queries that are happening globally every day and every month. It's crazy. I think the number from this past, it was either July or August, they had a peak of 87 billion queries in 1 month. So you're talking about just, the human mind has trouble conceiving of all the ways people are looking for different things. There's so many different, and then you take into account the fact that people are poor spellers or mistype things or doing things quickly. Using the negatives will help you to kind of weed down your audience.
Now, we have a lot of questions in only about 8 minutes, so I do want to make one quick point, though. A great way to build out that negative keyword list is to take a look at your search queries report in AdWords, which will allow you to see what people actually typed in that got clicks. And so, that will allow, you can say to yourself, wait, I don't have free shoes, and add that as a negative. It's a really great way to build out that keyword list. So let's move on and get through these as quickly as possible. Let us challenge ourselves to get to as many as we can. Amanda wants to know, will it benefit you from a quality score perspective in Google to use keywords on multiple match types? For example, does it help, hurt, or do nothing to include wrestling shoes on both phrase and exact match? Now, this is a great question because we actually just did a Google training recently. They came into our office and trained us on a few of these things, and this was one of the topics that came up.
It is, and they said that actually including multiple match types has, within the same ad group, has very little effect on quality score. So it's really interesting. Click-through rate does have an effect on quality score. So the downstream effect of using an ad group that was highly exact match kind of focused should lead to a higher click-through rate, which should lead to a better quality score for both that keyword and the ad group. So you can mix and match them. Be thoughtful about both your keyword level statistics and your ad group level statistics because they do roll them up. So if you've got an ad group that has a mix of exact, phrase, and broad, and your exact match stuff is getting great click-through rates, and your broad stuff is getting smeared with being mismatched with tons of things and getting really low click-through rates, the downstream effect can be lower overall quality score for that ad group. On an individual keyword level, they said mixing them actually has zero effect on quality score.
Excellent answer. So let's power right through this. Alicia has a specific question, just sort of a clarifier about our wrestling shoes example with the broad match modifier. She says, with the plus wrestling shoes keyword example, is Google applying broad match to the word shoes? For example, would it be possible to have a match like wrestling clothes? So I think the question here is, yes, the plus comes in front of wrestling, and so that will be treated as an exact match. But could clothes run for the word shoes?
It sure could. Alicia is putting us in a suplex with this question because Yeah, that's the danger, right? If you only broad match modify one of the words in the question, in the query, you can get mismatched. So if you were only a wrestling shoes provider, you would be able to show up for wrestling shorts, wrestling clothes, wrestling headgear, whatever else they sell for wrestling these days. Wrestling shows on TV. I mean, you do want to be careful with that. So if you're really only focused on shoes, you need to think about either excluding those using negatives or doing them as a phrase match or an exact match. So, the benefit is if you're a wrestling superstore and you've got all of those products, then all that you're really focused on is that you show for the word wrestling.
One thing I think that's cool about phrase match is if you were to put wrestling shoes in phrase match, it would include only those words exactly, but then some additional terms as well. So that would allow you some flexibility, with having some other terms, but still focusing only on wrestling shoes. So that's something, that's kind of interesting to think about. So here's a question from Richard. Is it on the horizon to have phrase and broad match in one negative key term? He's asking if negatives include phrase and broad match, or do negatives only have one match type?
So the best use of negatives is to just negative out a single term qualifier. You can technically negative a phrase, but you have to be careful about how you do that. It can be a little bit, you can end up excluding things that you would actually like to have in your campaign. So I would say really think about, what are the main themes that you want to negative? Things like free, things like used in our example. Think about that in terms of how you're using your negatives, brands you don't carry. And that's going to help you really tighten down your audience. If you start getting into negativing, 2 words and all of a sudden you've negatived Nike shoes and you stop appearing for certain shoe-related terms, that's going to be detrimental to your campaign.
All right, great. Everyone, we are at about 2 minutes before the end.
Ding, 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 ding.
I am astounded that we were able to keep it under 30 minutes today. This is, I think, a first for us here at Trata.
We like to talk about search.
We tend to be a little more long-winded. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will actually not be having a webinar next week because next Thursday we will be eating turkey.
And drinking wine.
If you guys are not here in the U.S., next Thursday is a very special holiday where we just eat a lot of turkey and, watch football. So we will see you, I hope, the following weekend for a really great webinar that we're planning right now with Boost CTR, another awesome search company. If you guys are interested in being automatically signed up for that, please go ahead and sign up for our webinar series by typing "sign me up" into the chat box. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. You will be getting an email later today with the recording of this webinar. This is the end of the webinar.